Some reason I just went off.
Howdy, folks, and welcome to Cattle Trails Showcase. I'm Ron Wilson, Poet Laureate, mighty glad to be your host. Today, we welcome members and guests of the International Chisholm Trail Association who are participating live, and also we're sending up a howdy to all of you who are watching on YouTube and watching our recording. We appreciate you joining us. Today is our first ever Cattle Trails Showcase, and I'm attempting to run the technology, so we're all in trouble. But we appreciate you bearing with us because we have some fantastic content coming for you today. This is a little bit of an experiment. It's our first ever attempt at the Cattle Trails Showcase, but we intend for this to become a monthly event. The purpose of the Cattle Trails Showcase is to continually highlight the communities, historical elements, museums, and other attractions along the Chisholm Trail and the Western Cattle Trail. We plan to do these sessions every month on the second Friday of each month at 10 a.m., and we welcome you to our inaugural session. The Cattle Trails Showcase is brought to you by the International Chisholm Trail Association. We have a number of officers of the International Chisholm Trail Association on with us today. And to kick off our session today, we have the president of the International Chisholm Trail Association, who is Dennis Katzenmeyer from Ellsworth, Kansas. Dennis, we look forward to a few remarks from you. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. We're very pleased to be a part and to help present this showcase. We're very excited about it because we think it's going to really share with the world what the trail towns have to offer and history of the trail. So we're very pleased to do that. The International Chisholm Trail is an organization that was organized back in about 2000. Our main purpose was just to preserve, create, celebrate the Chisholm Trail, as well as get it on the National Register of Historic Trails. And well, we're still in the process of trying to get that part accomplished. We welcome anybody that wants to join us. There's multiple levels. You can see that on our website. And we're pretty excited about where we are with the designation right now. We've got a change of leaders, so we kind of got to start over again, but we will pursue that. So with that, we're very happy and looking forward to presentations that we have in front of us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Dennis. And I appreciate Dennis's leadership through all of this. He is right that the top legislative priority for the International Chisholm Trail Association is the designation of the Chisholm and the Western Trails as National Historic Trails as designated by Congress. And that legislation was introduced late in 2020. So we look forward to that action in 2021. Last fall, many of you were part of the International Chisholm Trail Association Chisholm Trail Conference, which was held virtually for the first time ever. And that conference was a resounding success, and we appreciate everyone's participation. In fact, the conference went so well that people asked for more. They wanted to hear more from our excellent speakers, several of which are represented here. I see Jean Chavez, and we'll hear from Michael here in a minute. So people wanted to hear more. And so that's how the idea of the Cattle Trails Showcase really came about, was to hear more about the attractions up and down the trail. And Lonnie Steben was willing to serve as chair of the committee that was working on this project. And so with that, I'll turn the floor over to Lonnie.
Okay, thanks, Ron. I just want to thank everybody that has had a hand in making this possible. And a special thanks go out, of course, to our host, Ron. Ron's been invaluable in this effort. He's too modest to admit to it, but he's really helped drive the forces in getting the legislation presented in front of Congress. Also, Nancy Lawrence, our secretary, has spent endless hours gathering lists of names. And I think, Nancy, what do we have? About 125, 150 contact names now that we hope to work with as we move forward with trying to get
literally a couple of bajillion. But yeah, there's a couple of hundred, yes.
Nancy spent a lot of hours on that. And then, of course, Steve Myers from Texas has been helping us with the committee, and then also Marcy Jarrett from Oklahoma. So so from that prepared list of stakeholders, we're hoping to drive our efforts for the national designation. And we need everybody's help in getting the message out, and we'll have more correspondence with everybody as we get more information as our Congress gets back to business as usual down the road here, hopefully soon. And of course, like Dennis had said earlier, our ultimate effort is the national designation, but we also want to remind others about the important history and culture that helped shape the frontiers. So with that, Ron, we're ready for our speaker.
Very good, Lonnie. Thank you very much. And we're excited about our speaker this morning to kick off our series. I think it's appropriate to start with the National Museum. And so I might just say a word about our format. We'll ask our speaker to present about his topic, and we encourage folks to post questions in the chat. Some of you found the chat function, and on my screen, it's the very bottom center. There's a little icon that says chat. If you click on that, it'll call up a screen where you can type your message to everyone, or your question to everyone, or to individual participants for that matter. And so we will plan to take questions after the presentation, but please put your questions in the chat. And meanwhile, I think almost all of you have muted your mics. I appreciate you doing that so that we have great audio from our speaker. Our primary speaker today is Michael R. Grauer. He is the McCaslin Chair of Cowboy Culture, curator of Cowboy Collections and Western Art at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City. Michael is vice president of the International Chisholm Trail Association, also president of the Western Cattle Trail Association, and is literally a national expert on the cattle drives in the cowboy era. A native of Kansas, Michael holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Painting and a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Art History from the University of Kansas, Master of Arts in Art History from Southern Methodist University, and the Master of Arts in History from West Texas A&M University. He was named University of Kansas Crest Foundation Department of Art History's Distinguished Alumnus for 2012. He worked at the Smithsonian American Art Museum before becoming Curator of Art and Western Heritage at the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum in Canyon, Texas. He also lectured at West Texas A&M, where he's taught art history and Western history. He joined the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in September 2018. Has curated over 150 exhibitions on Western art, culture, and history, authored 60 publications, lectures nationally, does a living history cowboy presentation called Cowboy Mike, serves on the board of the Kansas Cowboy Hall of Fame, the National Drovers Hall of Fame, National Cowgirls Hall of Fame Research Committee, and the Executive Committee for Westerners International. So can't think of a more qualified speaker. Please welcome Michael Grauer.
Morning, everyone. It's an honor to speak with y'all on our initial foray into this kind of social media and all the things that we've got to do today. But what I'm going to do today is walk you through the history of the National Cowboy Museum and where we are today, especially in terms of cowboy history and cattle trail history, because it's absolutely vital. It's the heart and soul of the National Cowboy Museum. And I'll reiterate that throughout the talk, that we are in fact the National Cowboy Museum. There is no other. There are other institutions that deal with cowboy history, but by decree from the U.S. Congress in roughly 1955, we are the National Cowboy Museum. And so I'll walk through its history with a slideshow, and I'll provoke some questions. Arguments are always fun because it makes things a little more lively. So I can't see you now, so I'm just going to go ahead and do what I do, and then we'll go back for questions. So as you know, this is our first program in our Cattle Trails Showcase. As you also heard, I work at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, where I'm the McCaslin Chair. It's a mouthful. I just like to say that means I get to do all the cool stuff. The founder of the National Cowboy Museum was a man named Chester Reynolds. Chester Reynolds was chairman of the board of the Lee Jeans Company in Kansas City when he visited the Will Rogers Memorial in Claremore, Oklahoma, and came inspired, having a great interest in the American West, and I'll walk you through some of that too, because I think his role at Lee Jeans played a pretty significant role in shaping the institution where I get to work today, and I mean that sincerely. I get to do this, and it's a real honor. This is a photograph of Chester Reynolds holding a hat, cowboy hat, at one of the very first meetings of the board held here in Oklahoma City.
Michael,
And, can you all hear me?
we can hear you great. We are not seeing slides.
You're not seeing slides. Well, hold on.
Is it possible to share your screen?
Hold on. Let me try this again. Share screen. Try this again. Sorry. How about now?
There we go. Now we're getting there.
Okay. Trying to get the slideshow. How about now? You can see it all right now?
There we go. Perfect.
Well, anyway, this is Chester Reynolds. This is actually a dinner they had on the left slide. They had at the Cattleman's restaurant here in Oklahoma City, a great place for a steak still today. And also at a celebration at the Skirvin Hotel, recently renovated here in Oklahoma City, and a place to come check out. It plays a huge role in the history of this institution. In 1953 at Cheyenne Frontier Days, Chester Reynolds, as you can see from the quotation, he really proposed this to the nation, especially to the governors of what he considered the 17 Western states. Those of us who deal in trans-Mississippi history believe that was a little short-sighted. There should have been 5 other states involved in that, namely Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, and Minnesota, especially Missouri, because you really can't talk about Western history unless you talk about Missouri. And so he proposed a memorial, the National Cowboy Hall of Fame, as he said, and most importantly, the guard, cherish, and advance the heritage and romance of the West through a museum to house artifacts and tell that great story. He, as I said before, was chairman of the Lee Jeans Company. This is it was an important part of Western history, starting in Salina with H.D. Lee, and then moving to the headquarters there that you can see in the photograph on the right of the downtown building in Kansas City. It's now apartments, but it was one of those places that I remembered as a kid growing up in Kansas City. You know, it's just cool to have the Lee Jeans logo on top of that building, as well as the livestock exchange building down in the stockyards. But in terms of the timeline, how this came about, he cowboyed in Kansas and homesteaded in Colorado, started working for H.D. Lee in 1905. Lee eventually moved from Salina to Kansas City. Reynolds was actually the man who conceived of the Buddy Lee doll. Some of us remember the Buddy Lee doll. He usually wore overalls. And then ultimately Lee Jeans came up in 1925 with the Cowboys waist overalls, which Levi's had been making since the 1880s. And so this became their part of that. There was no Wrangler those days. Wrangler, as I like to tell students, if you're wearing Wrangler jeans, you need to take those in the backyard and burn them, because those aren't cowboy pants. That's just good marketing, good for them. But go get yourself a pair of Levi's 501s or Lee 101s, and you're good to go. But you can see in this timeline, he eventually becomes chairman of the board in 1952. And from that bully pulpit, he was able to talk about his dream for a Cowboy Hall of Fame. I think just an interesting history to go part of this. So his objectives, as you can see, and I'll list these for you, were very ambitious, as you can see. Honor past and present cowboy, stockmen, and ranchers. That's key. The acts and deeds of these men by the erection of a memorial and a museum. Guard, cherish, and advance the heritage and romance. Maintain that museum. Cooperate. That's the key thing, is cooperate with other organizations. And of course, all lawful acts are something that we all aspire to do. So the very first board meeting, ultimately, when he set out this plea, and the governors of all these Western states were very much involved with this, and also prominent citizens throughout the Western states, they had a board meeting in January of 1955 at the Brown Hotel in Denver. They decided to throw out the net for cities to bid on it. 46 cities bid on the site. And then there were semifinalists. Believe it or not, the old place where I used to work, and I worked at the Panhandle Plains Museum for 31 years in Canyon, Texas, was a site, the only site in Texas, mainly because of its Charles Goodnight and ranching heritage collections, which are really quite vast. Las Vegas, New Mexico, Cheyenne, Wyoming, Dodge City, Kansas, Colorado Springs, Miles City, North Platte, Oklahoma City, Prescott, and Rapid City, all genuine and worthy candidates They whittled it down, and after touring, they toured every one of these cities. Everyone rolled out the red carpet for the selection committee. And then they whittled it down to the 3 finalists: Dodge City, Colorado Springs, and Oklahoma City. One of the things that Chester Reynolds really stressed was a very public spot. He wanted it to be visible from whatever city it was placed in. And one of the reasons that Oklahoma City was selected by the trustees is because of the hill northeast of Oklahoma, downtown Oklahoma City, on which the Cowboy Hall of Fame eventually settled, is called Persimmon Hill. It's a very prominent location. Route 66 went right by here. And today it fits the bill for what he really saw as a National Cowboy Hall of Fame. And that's what it was called originally. And within a few weeks, they established the National Rodeo Hall of Fame, and I'll get to that in just a minute. So because of this association through Lee Jeans with rodeo contestants, rodeo became a very prominent part of the story almost immediately. So the dedication to the site was on November 12th, 1955. They really came out to play after selecting the sites. Parades and great fanfare were held leading up to Persimmon Hill. And then the original, what was called the National Cowboy Hall of Fame, today called the Hall of Great Westerners. The first inductees were Charles Goodnight, Will Rogers, Theodore Roosevelt, Charles Russell, the artist, of course, and Jake McClure. So, a pretty august slate of initial inductees, and that's continued even to this day. But that happened in 1955, and something that's continued to today. So this is a photograph of, and I love the shadow of the guy standing in the road taking a photograph of the site on Persimmon Hill. You can see the peaked roofs. It was a very modern design, as you will see, and they're supposed to be reflective not only of early dwellings on the plains, but also to reflect teepees and prairie schooners. It's a very stylized design, and I love the billboard. This is the site of the National Cowboy Hall of Fame, and you can turn it in. This is now the roadway for Interstate 44 that goes right down below the hill. So grand opening day in 1955, as you can see, it was an ambitious design. The photograph on the right looks northeast, and that's now Interstate 44. But you can see the flags that fly representing the 17 Western states. That's still part of what we do here at the Cowboy Museum. But the water spectacular, as I like to call it, is greatly reduced. And that loggia you see in the color photograph on the right, there are quite a bit of changes that have happened to that. But those of us who've started visiting the Cowboy Hall of Fame early on, and I've been coming here for nearly 40 years, remember the old design, and it was quite different. And so the programming, they hired a man named Dean Krakel as the initial director. They hired him away from the Gilcrease Museum up in Tulsa. He was originally from Colorado, had worked at the Air Force Academy Museum, and he had really ambitious ideas for the National Cowboy Hall of Fame. John Wayne bought into the mission of the institution immediately and rode in what I like to call the inaugural parade. That's John Wayne on a white horse in downtown Oklahoma City, and he led the parade from downtown Oklahoma City up to Persimmon Hill. It's about 6 miles or so to downtown, and there you can see him standing actually in front of scaffolding. They were already adding to it even as the doors opened. And that's key to understand. It's always ambitious, and that continues through today. But John Wayne ultimately left his personal collection to the museum when he died in 1979, and we have a section in our gallery devoted to the John Wayne collection. I mentioned before the Western Heritage Awards, which included the inductees into the what was then called the National Cowboy Hall of Fame. Those were initially held at the Skirvin Hotel in 1955, 10 years before there was a building. And then it continue even today. That photograph there on the right from 1990. I'm lucky enough to have attended the last one we had, unfortunately, with COVID. We didn't have it last year, but we do plan to have it in this coming April. And I was present, and you can actually access this speech on the Wrangler Network. Kevin Costner's speech was incredibly moving. As he talked about growing up as a little kid and always dreaming of being a cowboy, and how he, as he liked to say, he would stalk the bad guys across the top of the back of the couch and then tackle that bad guy who happened to be the family dog in great wrestling matches. And it's a really very moving speech, and I think it's genuine. But if you look at the photographs, you'll see the Skirvin Hotel photograph on the left of John Wayne, and on the right, this was held in the old Rodeo Hall of Fame. And after 1990, things changed rather dramatically in terms of the space usage as well as the collections that came in. So Western Heritage Awards is something we still do. This is where we give out our Wrangler Awards for film, Western publications in fiction and history, Western performance, Western music, right on down the line. And it's a big deal. And I would be remiss to if I did not mention that in April, it'll be quite a slate because it'll combine the 2020 inductees with the 2021 inductees. And suffice it to say that Augustus McCrae will be in the house. If you're interested in that sort of thing, and I happen to be a bit of a lonesome dove nerd, I'm hoping to at least bump elbows with Robert Duvall while he's here. We'll also have in the house Kurt Russell, and they'll induct both him and his father, Bing Russell, who was a longtime character actor, and we'll also have George Strait in the house. So it'll be a big time, needless to say. So go online and you can get your tickets if they still have any left. Western performers, of course, have always been very much part of what we do here. And you can see in the photographs, we actually maintain a Western performers gallery. Initially, all the inductees had a portrait painted of them, and those used to hang in the old performers gallery. We have a significant collection of them, those portraits, so we can't hang them all. But you can see it was quite a group that would come here to town during the Western Heritage Awards. And Gene Autry was heavily involved with the institution until he moved his sandbox to LA. Otherwise, his collection would be here. As I mentioned before, the National Rodeo Hall of Fame was established the same time as the Rodeo Historical Society in 1955. First inductee was Ike Rude, a longtime cowboy and working cowboy in Roper. And the National Rodeo Hall of Fame is here. And I think that's key for us to remember always, that it's always been the National Rodeo Hall of Fame. And that's it's what people tend to refer to this place as most of the time is as the hall. Art became a very much part of what we do. The acquisition of the famous End of the Trail sculpture from California in the late 60s eventually segued into the building of its own building, which is and ultimately moved to the front foyer. And then, of course, our Western art collection, specifically Frederick Remington and Charlie Russell, continues to grow. We have the third largest Charlie Russell collection in the world, which I'm proud to get to play with from time to time. But the heart and soul of the place is our American Cowboy collection. And we continue to add to that the Working Cowboy collection really until it wasn't until early 1990s when we acquired the Joe Grandee collection that we could really do substantive material culture history exhibits. Up to that point, the museum had been largely focused on art and rodeo. Finally, with the acquisition of the Grandee collection and subsequent collections that came after that, we became what we should have been all along in Chester Reynolds' dream, a history museum with an art collection. And that's where we stand today. So I'm going to walk you through the American Cowboy Gallery because it's more germane to what the Chisholm Trail Association does. And I appreciate Ron mentioning my association with the Western Cattle Trail Association as well. And these are all part of that effort. So this is the entrance to the gallery on the right. And as you enter, you'll see in the slide there directly in front of you, slide on the left, is a chuck wagon diorama. The chuck wagon actually came from the Matador Ranch in West Texas. Recently, I put a sombrero on the lead cowboy's head to help us remember about that Hispanic component, which I'll talk more about at length here in just a minute. The Hispanic section actually has its own part. And this hacendado that you see on the mounted horse helps us better understand the Spanish herding techniques. We've since added sections devoted to the charro on the left. You can see in the left-hand slide, but also to the Hawaiian paniolo, which is a cowboy that came directly from Mexico, learning those ranching traditions. And I'm in the process of working on a Baquero case, an exhibit case with Baquero artifacts that will go in here as well. We'll talk about that more here in just a minute. The other half of the gallery deals with, it kind of breaks into two parts: the what about cattle drives and ranching in cowboy history, and the who. And so this would be our who gallery here, which the entrance is in the slide on the right, which talks about the differences between Southern cowboys, primarily from Texas, and the Northern Plains cowboys there on the right-hand side. And a shot from the back that shows the Hispanic vaquero and his evolution into a Californio and a Southwestern cowboy in New Mexico and Arizona. But we also have women, as you can see, and then the central figure is Black cowboys. And I mentioned before the vaquero. That's the new iteration of our chuck wagon diorama with a Mexican vaquero as part of it. Black cowboy on the left here, Native American cowboy on the right, of course, largely regionally developed here in former Indian Territory, now Oklahoma, but especially prominent as well up in the Dakotas, Wyoming, and Montana. The chuck wagon, or I'm sorry, a bunkhouse cutaway that you can partly enter in the slide on the right, and then cowboy clothing and gear, boots on the far left, kind of dark, and then hats on the right. Pretty significant boot collection, and then a little fancier gear there in the center case with the green shirt. Branding irons and barbed wire, 35,000 pieces of barbed wire in our barbed wire collection. And then in the slide on the right is what I call the Ortega Chapel. Luis Ortega, of course, is the most famous rawhide braider and horsehair braider in history. He's the Michelangelo of cowboy gear. And we received his collection in the early 90s and created an exhibit room specific to his work. And it's unparalleled anywhere in the country. The what gallery, the evolution from trail drives, from the Spanish tradition to trail drives to early ranching and so on, takes place in this gallery. And most importantly, or as important, is the geography. And in the floor, there's a granite trail map that shows the different cattle trails that we've recently adjusted, and I'll show slides of that in just a minute, but you'll be able to see that. But the slide on the right, you can see the case right in front of you is early ranching in Texas, where it begins. Adjacent to it is our rodeo gallery, our National Rodeo Gallery. Historic rodeo collections, unlike anywhere else. You just won't find these artifacts anywhere. It's set up like an arena with a sort of a chronological history of rodeo on the outskirts and what would be the catwalk around the arena. Even the announcer stands, which actually includes a cutout of my predecessor, Don Reeves, posing up there in the speaker's booth, and also Richard Rattenberry is also up there, who was our former curator of history. So, these guys are obviously without shame in the same things that they do. So we'll chouse them just a little bit about that. Historic rodeo exhibits, as you can see on the left, that timeline, and note in particular the section devoted to women and rodeo that no other institution can do. And of course, cowboys of color. We own Bill Pickett's saddle in our bulldogging section, and each part of the rodeo arena is specific to the event with a representative person to represent that event. And of course, Bill Pickett represents bulldogging. This is the women in rodeo section, as you can see. And to have those rigs, clothing, boots, hats, gauntlets, and so on from these tiny women, and most of them were tiny, less than 5 feet tall, and riding the rough stock that the men did. It's an incredible story. And Richard Rattenberry, whom I mentioned before, was the curator in charge of this great exhibition. Western Performers Gallery, as I mentioned before, is very much part of what we do. Basically a timeline from Western fiction around to Wild West shows, silent Western films, early talkies, sidekicks, prominent Western entertainers. As you can see, coming around to more current, the slide on the right, of course, with the Tom Selleck poster, you can see that's Danny Glover's costume that he wore in Buffalo Soldiers there in that same slide on the right. But you can see the stars in the floor, which we capitalize on. That's Norman Rockwell's portrait of Walter Brennan right there in the center. I hope you can see my pointer, which is pretty special in that collection. And this is the John Wayne section, which shows not only his personal possessions, but costumes he wore in various films. We own the special altered Winchester carbines that he used in both Stagecoach and True Grit. We own 2 examples of that, one of which is on exhibit. You can see it right here. And that's really important. I mentioned before, Joe Grandy, Western artist, we acquired his collection in the early 90s and created the Grandy Museum of the Frontier West. This deals with mountain men on one side and plains people on the other. This is the mountain men section. Pretty special plains people on the right, quite substantial in that offering. Our Frontier Army, I like to say to people, is as good, in my opinion, as the exhibits you'll see on the Frontier Army and the Forts museums. And many of those have been defunded, and so we're very fortunate to have these. And as far as as I've been told, everything in here is authentic except one pair of reproduction boots, which is pretty spectacular. And our bugler there in the foreground is a Buffalo Soldier, and we have a section that deals with that as well. So a couple of more slides of the Frontier Army area. Ordnance, of course, and then, of course, subject areas, Army women, enlisted men, American Indian scouts, and so on. It's pretty spectacular. Hunting the West, of course, is part of that story. The changes in technology that allowed hunters to bag larger game than they're used to, larger caliber weapons, and so on. Very much a part of what we do here. In recent, since I've been here, one of the things I've really pushed is better representation for cowboys of color, in particular the Spanish ranching traditions. I spoke at the Chisholm Trail Association annual meeting about this, but I'll reaffirm this: is that Black cowboys have already gotten excellent play here at the museum, but the Spanish vaquero and the Mexican vaquero not so much, and we've made great strides in recent times, especially with the acquisition of this Johan Ruhindas watercolor depicting two Spanish vaqueros or Mexican vaqueros roping cattle, which is, of course, the essence of cowboying. They're all wearing leather clothing, which signifies, because of the caste system, that they are people of color, and it's correct to say that, in fact, the very first cowboys were probably Indians, or they certainly were mixed race, or in fact were black. So that's the whole idea of using a rope to manage herd stock comes from West Africa, and of course using the horse to herd that same stock is North African technology, and those coalesce in eastern Mexico and eventually make their way up in Texas and so on. We recently acquired this painting on the right by W. Herbert Dunton, showing two Mexican vaqueros roping grizzly bears in Chihuahua on the Hearst Babacora Ranch. And this is a brand new installation. I recently got a chance to rehang the Western Art Galleries, and we decided to hang this new acquisition of a Dunton oil done in 1910 next to an entire vaquero rig, as you can see there from the permanent collection, from sombrero to chapareras to the saddle, the riata, all the way across. Everything that's depicted in the painting is also in the exhibit case to its left. Moving on to the other things I've been working on is making adjustments to the cattle trails map in the floor of the American Cowboy Gallery. And we added, thanks to people like Kim Goodnight from Dodge City and Wichita, we added Dodge City, we added Wichita, and we added Baxter Springs. And this photograph here shows the efforts that went on just a few weeks ago to re-black all the different trails so they're more visible. This has been in the floor since 1999, and it's sort of worn away. So we've recently re-blacked it, and also emphasized the fact that the first cattle trails actually went east, and they also went west before they went north. And of course, emphasizing the other Western states that Chester Reynolds didn't make part of that original plan. Also part of this is an effort to introduce people to the American Cowboy Gallery. You can't have cowboys without cows. So we brought a longhorn steer out of the basement, gave him a mani-pedi and hair transplants, gave him a repair, put him out right at the entrance, added a hands-on chuck wagon right outside that entrance that was donated for that purpose. And then, of course, hands-on cowboy things. And of course, you can see This was taken pre-COVID, because after COVID happened, nobody can touch anything anymore because nobody remembers how to wash their hands, apparently. But in any case, this stands right outside the American Cowboy Gallery, and it's actually a lead-in to the new outdoor learning experience called Lichikoshkamo, which is Chickasaw word that means let's play. And so all of this is on Persimmon Hill to the south side of the building. This is part of the original building. This is part of that wing that was added. I'll talk more about that now, but a reconstruction of Mesa Verde, a Hopi house here, Kiowa teepee here, Caddo grass house here. Underneath this trees is a Pawnee Earth Lodge, Chickasaw Council House, and some things that I had added, which is a Mexican roping corral, an interactive for kids to talk about those Mexican roping traditions. And then also a depot right here, of course, is a loading chute, cattle car, because all of these were cow towns, and that's an absolute vital part of that story. Most recently, we did an exhibition called Caballeros y Vaqueros, using our permanent collection to talk about those Spanish and Mexican ranching heritages and technologies. And believe it or not, we won an award from AASLH, American Association of State and Local History. That's something we're pretty proud of. This is a few installation shots from Caballeros y Vaqueros, first major exhibition I did when I got here. And it was a whole idea about cowboys north and south. It really was a migration from Mexico south and Mexico north. And you can see the gaucho shaking hands with the American cowboy there in this wonderful drawing by Jody Young, who also supplied some of the imagery for Caballeros y Vaqueros, especially because of his work amongst the Californios and the Vaqueros out there in California. We were able to talk about where Cowboy Ground Zero really is, which is Western Africa. This is an image from True West magazine, and they missed the West Africa part, but North Africa across the Atlantic to here, and then it migrates up. That's really the cowboy story. We were able to talk about multiculturalism on trail drives, something we talk a lot about in our work on the Chisholm Trail. How that segued into Wild West shows to include women, because who doesn't want to see a beautiful, daring Western girl and Mexican senorita? It's a good way to sell tickets, of course. And of course, there were women riding rough stuck, as I said before, like Thelma Warner, who was a 6'2" Bronco pickup rider from South Dakota in the 1920s, whose archive we just acquired. Our Dickinson Research Center has 800,000 images, most of which deal with cowboy, and the Rodeo Historical Society collection is quite magnificent. It includes photographs like you see here of George Fletcher, who very prominent cowboy in the 19-teens, who went on to serve the U.S. proudly in World War I, but really an important part of that story as well. The Hispanic cowboy and the Hispanic vaquero, especially in Western Mexico, Sinaloa and Sonora, using, as you can see, the armas that helped protect the legs and also chest and neck of the horse is something we can use our art to tell that story. And Caballeros, this is all part of Caballeros y Vaqueros. And it's one of the first times we've done our labels bilingually in a very long time, something we're going to continue to do as we move forward. Just to reinforce the point, this was my interest area as working cowboys, and I wanted to help drive home that distinction between a caballero, who's a gentleman performing horse skills, and a vaquero, who's a working man who's working for very little money, largely anonymous. And nothing tells that story better than these two saddles. And I will tell you that vaquero saddle is one of my absolute favorite artifacts in this collection, because as you can see, it's been up the trail a couple of times, and it's really quite outstanding. So I'll conclude with this image and reinforce the idea and the purpose of this place to be the national Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. That's what Chester Reynolds always dreamed of. And Western Heritage, of course, encompasses many more things than cowboy history. And I think that the two slides projected over the top of the institution help tell that better. This is Welcome Sundown by a sculpture by Hollis Wilford that stands at our entrance. And of course, right inside the entrance is this fantastic, great a sculpture by James Earl Fraser called Into the Trail. I don't see it. I don't interpret it the way many people do. I see this as warrior pausing in a time in battle and refortifying himself. That's how I interpret that. And of course, welcome sundown. Those cowboys worked from Kansas City to Kent for very low wages and bad food, dangerous conditions, and sundown was always welcome, at least for a little while. But this is our institution today. As you can see, it's about 220,000 square feet. This was the original building here in the middle. The Special Event Center added on this end in the early 90s, and then the exhibit halls here on the west side added at about the same time. All along here are bas reliefs by the cowboy artist Tom Ryan. This is cowboys driving a remuda of horses toward the front, which is one of my favorite works of art we have on the exterior. But this slide was taken actually, obviously during the drought from a few years ago, because it looks pretty dry out there. But in any case, it gives you an idea. And this, of course, is Persimmon Hill. It's very prominent and fits quite nicely into what Chester Reynolds always wanted, a prominent location for this national institution. The important thing to remember is it belongs to the nation. It doesn't belong to Oklahoma. It happens to be in Oklahoma, and it needs to be thought of that way at all times. And I don't mean that as offensive to Oklahoma. That's not what I mean. But it is a national institution. It just happens to be built where it is, and it's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to talk about it to you folks. And I'll be glad to take questions and hope to answer them as well as I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Absolutely outstanding. We know that this museum is a national treasure, and we're so grateful that you would share it with us. Our time's going to run short, but we do have a couple of questions. There are a lot of related arts that went along. One of those was braiding, and maybe you touched on that. The question was, Tom Horn was known for his braiding. Does the museum have any of his braiding, or what do you have in terms of that types of art?
Am I still unmuted?
Yes.
I don't think we have anything from Tom Horn's braiding. We do have a bridle bit that's supposed to have belonged to him. That's what I've been able to track down, but that's one of those, those legendary things. We're not really sure how to prove it, but we do have a bridle bit in the collection that was associated with him.
Thanks. There's another question about, you spoke a lot about the vaqueros, and we greatly appreciate that. Not only were they an important part of our history, but they also played a role in the Wild West shows, as you alluded to later on. Gene Chavez asks, what do you have to talk about the contribution of the vaquero or other cultures in those Wild West shows, as you touched on?
Well, pretty significant collections about vaqueros. I mean, it's, you saw a couple of the saddles and also chado saddles, but we do have some really excellent examples of rigs that help tell that story. As far as specific to the Wild West shows, we do have a riata that was braided and used by Mexican Joe, who rode for Pawnee Bill, and I think, and also for the 101s. And so I was fortunate enough, and I'll just share this with you. If you've never visited the Pawnee Bill Ranch Museum at Pawnee, Oklahoma, you all owe it to yourselves to go see that, because it is a unique institution that's overseen by Oklahoma Historical Society. I'd strongly encourage you to go see that. Really, it's really, it's not exactly right on the beaten path, but absolutely well worth it. And they've got an exhibit case dedicated to Mexican Joe, who worked there for many, many years. But as far as our collection here, we do have that one artifact, but we have a number of braided, rawhide braided horsehair and so on, things that came directly from vaquero hands, although we don't know who they were.
Michael, thank you. We appreciate you sharing this wonderful message about this fantastic treasure there in Oklahoma City. And thank you for kicking off our inaugural Cattle Trails Showcase.
My pleasure. Do come see us.
We look forward to that. Yeah, a round of applause for Michael Grauer. Sound is deafening on my screen here. I hope you can see a slide that I just put up on the screen. We have 2 or 3 requests for you. One is to join us next month. So the second Friday of every month in 2021, we propose to conduct another Cattle Trails Showcase here on Zoom. And so, Friday, February 12 at 10 a.m., we'll have our next Cattle Trails Showcase. Our speaker will be Bruce Shackelford, the Texas history curator at the Whitty Museum in San Antonio, one of the largest cities along the trail. And Bruce, I think, is or was on with us today. I understand the Whitty Museum recently experienced a $100 million upgrade. So you won't want to miss this episode. So make sure you're with us 10 a.m. on February 12th. Another request is to join the ICTA. The International Chisholm Trail Association is actively working on the federal legislation to designate the Chisholm and Western Trails as National Historic Trails. Great opportunity for tourism and economic development and celebration of history in the Trails region. You can join ICTA, be a part of the annual conference, be a part of this the work to achieve the federal legislation, and be a part of the Cattle Trails Showcase. So you'll see information on the screen, I hope, about the dues and an address where you could mail a check. And then our website for the Chisholm Trail Association is at the very bottom. And you can go to that website and find information about the dues as well. And then our last request is we want to continue to highlight the communities and the attractions along the trail. And so if your community is interested in being highlighted, if you have an attraction that you would like to see highlighted, we encourage you to get in contact with any of the officers of the International Chisholm Trail Association. Lonnie Steben is the chair of that committee. You heard from Lonnie earlier. Actually, Lonnie, maybe you could share your email address. Would you mind doing that?
Yeah, that'd be great, Ron. It's just, I'll do the basic one, is just Lonnie S, Lonnies at sktc.net. And that's Lonnie S at sktc.net. And then, Ron, I noticed, I don't know if everybody caught it, but I think Joel might have had a presentation, or we had a guest from the lead doll. I don't know if you caught that, Michael. I'm thinking maybe that's what he set up in the chair. I may be wrong there, but Joel.
Yeah,
there you go, Joel.
that was a what do you call it, a buddy lead doll that was actually in my grandfather's mercantile.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic.
Thanks for sharing that, Joel.
Absolutely, Joel. Thank you. And Joel's, by the way, Joel's the secretary treasurer of the, or no, he's the treasurer of the Western Cattle Trail Association. So, you know, there we go. Thank you, Joel, for being here.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Joel. And thanks for sharing that treasure, Buddy Lee doll. Wow. You sure you didn't conspire with Michael Grauer to do that? That was just too good to be true. We appreciate you doing that. Folks, thank you for joining us on the Cattle Trail Showcase today. We look forward to seeing you next week. So to close our program, this is Ron Wilson, Poet Laureate, saying thanks for taking time to join us in this place, and come on back next month for our Cattle Trails Showcase. Happy trails, everybody.
Bye, all.